The county shelter named him Jasper, a tan dog with careful eyes and a scar on one ear. The volunteer said he had been found tied to a fence behind a discount store. I signed the papers, paid the fee, and drove him home in silence. He sat upright, watching the road, then the rear window, then my hands on the wheel. He never whined. He never panted. He only memorized every turn we took. In my apartment, he moved room to room like a tenant checking exits. He pressed his nose to the front door seam, then the patio slider, then the window latches. He did not chew toys. He did not circle for a bed. He paced the same lines, stopping at corners and listening. When I clipped his leash for a walk, he sat by the door before I reached it, ready, waiting as if on cue. Jasper picked our route and I let him. He pulled toward the same block of townhomes, then slowed and studied driveways. He passed a blue sedan and brushed his flank against the bumper. He passed a white van and stared at its side panel. On the third day, he stopped at a mailbox cluster and sat, looking up at the security camera above the parcel lockers. He watched it until it turned away for seconds. That night, he dropped a black key fob onto my kitchen tile. It was not mine. It had a worn logo from a gym. The next morning, he brought a single latex glove, folded into a square, tucked between his teeth like a gift. On day 5, it was a slim plastic card from a hotel 2 miles away. I checked his mouth, his collar, his paws. He had no pockets. He arrived with trophies. At the vet, Jasper stood still on the scale. The tech waved the scanner over his shoulders and back, then tried again. No chip. I paid for a new one, then the vet lifted his collar to fit it. Her fingers paused at the buckle. Under the nylon, taped flat against the strap, was a tracker with a battery and a faded serial number. She said she saw them on hunting dogs, not on strays. I typed the serial number into a search page and found a distributor for tracking units. The company did not answer, but their site listed an address in an industrial strip. I drove there with Jasper in the seat. The office door had a padlock and a sign for lease. In the lot, Jasper froze and stared at a pickup. A man stepped out, looked at Jasper, then at me, and walked closer without hurrying. He stopped 6 feet away and held up a red leash. He said Jasper answered to another name, and he claimed the dog had slipped away. He said he had been looking for weeks. Jasper sat at my heel, eyes on the man's hands. His tail did not move. I said the dog was adopted and I was leaving. The man nodded, stepped aside, and watched my car until I turned out of the lot. At midnight, Jasper stood in the hallway, head angled toward the front door, body rigid. He did not bark. He breathed through his nose. I listened and heard a click at the lock, then another. My phone showed my camera, a gloved hand working the knob, then pausing when the porch light shifted. The view caught a pickup at the curb. The hand withdrew. Jasper stayed planted until the pickup rolled away with no headlights. In the morning, I filed a report, showed the video, and handed over the tracker. The officer said there was not much to charge without a forced entry. He suggested locks. On our walk, Jasper pulled toward the townhomes again. He stopped at the parcel lockers and stared at Unit 14. I followed his gaze and saw paint around the lock and a line of graphite on the jamb like a mark from a key. That evening, I tightened Jasper's collar and checked the latch. While I carried trash out, he backed free and trotted away. I followed and found him at Unit 14. He touched his nose to the door seam, then tapped 3 times, paused, then twice. He sat and waited. A pickup rolled in and stopped at the curb. The man stepped out, eyes on Jasper. Jasper rose and walked to him, then turned toward my building. I pulled Jasper close. The man said he wanted his dog, and he said Jasper had work to finish. He nodded at my building and said Jasper marked units, then brought back proof, keys, cards. He said the dog told them which locks gave. I told him to leave. He said I had already been paid. Jasper pressed into my leg. I backed away, loaded him into my car, and drove to the police station. The sergeant watched the video and made calls, and 2 officers drove back with me. We waited near building. The pickup returned at dawn. The man walked to my door and tried the knob. Officers moved in and took him down. Jasper barked once, then fell silent. At the station, they kept Jasper in a holding run as evidence. When I visited, he tapped the gate 3 times, paused, then twice, and sat to wait. The rescue called her Margot, a grey cat with a clipped ear and a habit of holding eye contact. The foster said she came from a neglect seizure. I signed the contract that promised I would keep her indoors and return her if I could not. Margot rode home in a carrier, silent, then stepped out and inspected every threshold. She chose the hallway closet as a den and slept there quietly with my shoes. 2 days later, I took her for a wellness visit. The clinic scanned her back and a number flashed on the screen. The vet asked where I had gotten her, then stepped out to call someone. She returned with a form and said the chip was registered to the county. The note read, "Evidence hold, do not release." She said she was required to report it. Margot sat on the table and watched my hands. That afternoon, a county investigator came to my door. He wore a polo. He said a cruelty case was linked to the chip, and the cat was supposed to be held until court. I showed him the rescue receipt and the contract. He said the rescue had been warned not to place animals from that seizure. He handed me a card with a case number and hearing date. He said the cat could be seized. The rescue director was quiet. She said a volunteer had cleared the mistaken hold tag, and she asked me to return Margot. I said no. I said the county could take her with a court order, but I would not hand her over. After the call, I found an envelope taped to my doorframe. Inside was a page with my name and address, and a line that read, "Return the cat before the hearing." I changed my lock and kept Margot indoors. The next day, a court clerk called and said the hearing time had been moved earlier. She said notice had been mailed to the address on file. That evening, I found a dish on my porch, filled with tuna and white tablets pressed into it. Margot watched from the window, tail still. I dumped the dish into a trash bag and washed the porch with hot water. I called the investigator on the card. He arrived and took the dish. He said the case involved a backyard breeding operation, and several surviving cats were tagged as evidence. He said the defendant had posted bond and was barred from contacting witnesses. He said poison was common because it erased evidence and made owners look careless. He told me to keep Margot away from doors and windows, and to call if anyone came back. On hearing day, I carried Margot in her carrier and sat outside the courtroom. The rescue director sat away and would not meet my eyes. A man walked the hall, scanning faces as if reading a list. He stopped near me and spoke low. He said returning the cat would make life easier. He set an envelope on the bench beside the carrier, cash, and walked away. I left it there and told the bailiff. The judge reviewed the papers and said the hold remained. I carried Margot to the investigator in the lobby and signed a release form. Margot did not struggle. She looked past me as if tracking movement behind my shoulder. In the parking lot, my rear tire was down to the rim. A metal tack sat under the valve cap. My phone showed missed calls from an unknown number. I drove home on the spare alone. 2 weeks later, the investigator called. He said the tablets tested as pesticide, and the courthouse envelope matched a name on the bond. He asked for my statement and said the county wanted charges for witness tampering. He said Margot was being held at the kennel until the case ended. That night, a packet arrived by mail. It contained motions and witness lists. My address was circled in marker, and a note said, "Stay quiet." I stayed with a friend. When I came back today, my door was shut, but the strike plate screws were backed out a turn, as if someone had tested how loose it was. A dime lay on the doormat, bent at the edge. Inside, the closet door stood open. Margot's den was empty and clean. No valuables were missing. On the counter sat a single cat treat, centered on a paper towel like a sample. The case ended with a plea. The investigator said the defendant served time and could not own animals. He said Margot could be released. I met him at the station and signed for her. She rubbed her cheek on my sleeve. On the drive home, a sedan followed me. At a light, it tapped my bumper once, then turned away. When I reached my lot, I saw the sedan at the far end, engine running. Inside my apartment, Margot walked to the closet, then to the front door, then to the window. She sat and listened. I unpacked the carrier and found the kennel paperwork. Behind it was a second slip of paper, folded small, not from the county. It listed my unit number, my car make, and the hours I was usually away, written in letters. The ink bled through as if pressed hard. Margot stared at the door. The rescue warned me that ferrets were thieves. They said Locket had been surrendered after biting a roommate over a sock. He was small, cinnamon-colored, with bright eyes. I brought him home to my third-floor apartment and set up his cage. He ignored it and went straight for gaps, under the bathroom vanity, along the kitchen kickplate behind the dryer. He pressed his head into each opening like he was mapping routes. On the second night, Locket dragged an earbud in and left it by the couch. The next morning, he delivered a lipstick, then a brass key. None of it was mine. I walked the building and returned the earbud to the woman in 3B. She said she had lost it in the hallway. I set the lipstick on the laundry room counter, unsure where it belonged. The key I kept, thinking it might open something. That evening, I tried the key on the maintenance closet. It turned. Inside were mops, cans, and a stack of flattened boxes. Behind the boxes sat a plastic tote with the building logo. The tote was full of opened mail and small parcels cut along one seam. Names and addresses showed through torn paper. I closed it and locked the door. Locket was under the vanity when I returned, paws dusty, eyes fixed on me. I called the property office and said I had found opened mail in a maintenance closet. The manager asked how I had opened the door. I said I had found a key. She told me to place it under my doormat. An hour later, the key was gone. The next morning, Locket dragged a fob in. A label on it read, Master. I wrapped it in a towel and brought it to the leasing office. The manager took the fob and said it was a tag. She pushed a form toward me and asked me to sign that I had found it outside. I said no. I said my ferret had brought it from inside. Her jaw set. She said animals got into vents. She said I was creating a liability issue. In the lobby, 2 officers spoke with a tenant who held a torn parcel and looked to cry. That night, an officer knocked and asked if I had seen anyone in the package room. I said I had found opened mail in a closet. He asked to see it. We walked there and the door was locked and the brass key was gone. While he made a call, Locket slid from under my vanity and dropped a heavy key ring onto my tile. It held keys stamped with the building's name in rows. The supervisor took the key ring and asked how my ferret could reach keys. I showed him the gap under the vanity and the loose kickplate. He saw scuff marks leading into the wall and said a utility chase ran behind the units. The next morning, maintenance arrived with panels and sealant. The manager watched from the hallway and kept glancing at my door. Locket paced near the vanity, nose pressed to the trim. After midnight, Locket froze beside the sealed panel and placed his paw on it. I put my ear to the wall and heard a scrape, then a shift, like a body turning in a narrow space. I called dispatch and said someone was in the chase. Officers arrived and opened the access hatch. A man dropped out onto the carpet with a bag. He wore coveralls with the building logo, and his face was dusty. In the bag, the officers found opened parcels and gift cards. The man said he was repairing a leak. The supervisor asked his name, and he gave one the manager had used for staff. An officer radioed it in and got no record. They walked him to a cruiser. Later, the supervisor showed me images from inside the chase, a cavity lined with boxes. Torn envelopes lay there, along with keys and cash in piles. By afternoon, the manager was at my door with a notice. She said my animal had caused damage, and she said the police were my fault. She said I would be billed. Locket waddled out and dropped a ring onto the floor between us. It held office keys and a brass tag stamped leasing. The manager stopped speaking. She stared at the ring, then at me, then backed into the hall and walked away today. That evening, officers returned and asked for the key ring. I handed it over. They said the man in the chase was not an employee, and the manager's access logs matched missing package reports. They said arrests were likely. After they left, I started packing. When I opened my door, a note lay on the threshold. It was an index card with my name. Beneath my name was one line, "Move the animal out tonight." I loaded Locket into his carrier and drove to a motel. In the room, he pressed his nose to the vent. I sat on the bed with the note. Locket emerged with something in his mouth and dropped it on the carpet. It was a key on a tag that read Unit 3A, unit number, written in the same letters as the note. Locket returned to the vent and began to dig at the grill.